They were already winning. Or at least, that's what they believed. The ground trembled under steel as dozens of Soviet T-34 tanks pushed forward, engines roaring, tracks crushing mud and debris. Smoke filled the horizon, artillery thunder echoed in the distance. But inside the tanks there was no panic, only focus and confidence. They had done this before. They had broken through German lines before, and this time felt no different. German defenses ahead looked weak, scattered trenches, suppressed infantry, no visible heavy armor, nothing that could stop a full armored advance. Maintain speed, keep moving. The order came through clearly, without hesitation. The formation held tight. Tanks rolled forward in a steady wave, some briefly stopping to fire into the haze ahead. Each shot shook the hull, each explosion tore open the ground in front of them. But still, no serious response came back. Just distant gunfire. Just silence where resistance should have been. And that's when it started to feel wrong. Too quiet. One commander narrowed his eyes, trying to see through the narrow vision slit. Smoke, dirt, shadows, nothing else. Why aren't they falling back? No one answered. The colonna kept moving, engines pushing harder, tracks grinding louder, steel pressing forward like nothing could stop it. Then, suddenly, the lead tank stopped. No explosion, no warning. It just froze in place. For a second, no one reacted. Maybe mechanical failure. Maybe плохая земля. Then, a flash. A violent odor ripped through the tank. Fire burst out from inside. The turret jerked. Thick black smoke poured into the sky. Hit! We're hit! But from where? No muzzle flash, no direction, no sound before impact. Just destruction. Silence hit harder than the explosion. Then, another tank. A sudden strike, metal tearing apart, flames bursting out. Now confusion turned into tension. Return fire! Fire! Several tanks unleashed shells into the distance, firing blindly into smoke, into empty space, into nothing they could actually see. No confirmed target, no visible enemy. And then, a third tank burned. Now the formation slowed. The perfect advance began to break. Tanks shifted positions. Commanders shouted over the radio, voices overlapping, trying to understand what was happening. Where is he? They scanned forward. Left. Right. Nothing. Only smoke and burning wrecks. And somewhere beyond that smoke, hidden in the distance, watching without moving, was him. A single Tiger tank. Still. Silent. Waiting. Not reacting. Not rushing. Just aiming. Because he already understood what they didn't. They were driving straight into his line of fire, and this was only the beginning. They still thought it was random. They were wrong. The burning wrecks were still smoking when the next shot came, fast, precise, unstoppable. Another T-34 was hit before anyone could even react, the shell tearing straight through the armor as if it wasn't there. Flames bursting out instantly, turning steel into a coffin in seconds. Confusion spread through the colonna, but they kept moving, because stopping meant death, and moving forward still felt like the only option. Keep advancing! Don't stop! But now something had changed. The confidence was gone. In its place, tension. Every crew member was listening, waiting, trying to catch the direction of the next shot. Engines roared louder, tracks accelerated, but the faster they moved, the more exposed they became. Then, another odor. A tank on the left flank exploded, its turret snapping violently as fire consumed it. No warning, no visible shooter, just destruction appearing out of nowhere. We're under fire! Find him!" Guns turned in different directions. Some tanks fired blindly into the smoke. Others slowed down, trying to identify a target. But the battlefield offered nothing. Just haze, fire, and chaos. And then, another shot. Another tank gone. Now panic was beginning to rise, not loud, not uncontrolled, but cold and creeping. The kind that settles in your chest when you realize you are not in control anymore. "Where is he? Where is he firing from?" Inside one of the tanks, the commander pressed his eye harder against the vision slit, scanning desperately, trying to catch even the smallest flash. And then, he saw it. A distant flicker. Far beyond the smoke, almost invisible. But it was enough. "Contact! Front! Far distance!" The turret turned. The gun aligned. The crew moved fast, adrenaline taking over. "Fire!" The shell blasted forward, cutting through the smoke. But nothing. No confirmation. No hit. Just empty distance. Because the enemy had already moved. Far away, hidden behind the chaos, the Tiger shifted position slowly, deliberately. Not rushing, not exposing itself. It fired and moved. Fired and moved. Every shot calculated, every target chosen. Another T-34 stopped dead in its tracks, flames erupting from the engine compartment. "He's picking us off." Now they understood. This wasn't artillery. This wasn't random fire. This was one machine, one tank, hunting them. "Spread out! Spread out!" The formation broke. Tanks began to separate, trying to reduce the risk, trying to make themselves harder targets. But it only made things worse. Now they were isolated. Now they were easier to pick. The Tiger fired again. Direct hit. Another tank destroyed. The sound of impacts echoed across the battlefield, shells slamming into armor, explosions tearing through steel, smoke thickening with every passing second. "Return fire! All units, return fire!" Dozens of guns answered. The field lit up with muzzle flashes as Soviet tanks unleashed everything they had. Shells flew across the battlefield, slamming into the ground, into wrecks, into empty prostranstvo. And finally, one of them hit. A shell struck the Tiger's armor with a deafening clang. But it didn't penetrate. It bounced like it meant nothing. Inside the Tiger, the crew didn't panic. They didn't hesitate. "Next target, slightly left, fire." The gunner adjusted. The loader slammed another shell into place. The commander watched, calm, focused, almost detached from the chaos around him. Another shot. Another kill. Now the battlefield was no longer an advance. It was a trap. The Soviets were no longer attacking. They were trying to survive. "We can't hit him!" More shells struck the Tiger. More impacts, sparks, metal ringing. But nothing got through. The armor held. The machine kept moving. Slow, controlled, relentless. And with every second, another tank burned. Smoke covered everything now. Visibility dropped. Communication broke down. Voices on the radio overlapped, shouted, panicked, desperate. "Pull back. No, push forward. We need coordinates." But there were no clear orders anymore, only chaos. And somewhere inside that chaos, the Tiger kept firing. One shot, one kill, again, and again, and again, until the battlefield itself seemed to stop breathing. Because now everyone understood the same thing. This was no longer a battle. This was a hunt. And they were the prey. They finally found him, and instantly regretted it. The next flash didn't come from nowhere this time. It came from him. Clear, visible, deadly. For a split second, through the dim and fire, the silhouette appeared. Massive, unmoving, undeniable. There, front, that's him. Turrets snapped in his direction. Engines roared as multiple T-34s tried to reposition at once, metal grinding, tracks slipping in mud, desperation starting to override coordination. All guns on target! Fire! The battlefield erupted. Dozens of shells launched almost simultaneously, cutting through the smoke, screaming towards the Tiger. For the first time, they weren't blind anymore. Impact. One shell hit the ground near him. Another struck the armor. Sparks exploded across the hull, a direct hit. And yet, nothing happened. The shell bounced. Another impact. Another ricochet. The Tiger didn't stop. Inside the tank, everything was controlled. No panic, no chaos, just calculation. Range confirmed. Adjust 2 degrees. Fire. The gun roared. One of the attacking T-34s was instantly destroyed, the shell punching straight through the front plate, fire bursting out in a violent explosion. He's not stopping. More Soviet tanks opened fire. Now it wasn't a formation. It was survival. Every crew trying to land a hit before becoming the next target. Shells slammed into the Tiger again and again. The sound of metal being struck echoed like hammer blows across the battlefield. Clang, clang, clang. But nothing penetrated. The armor held like a wall. We're hitting him. Why is nothing happening? Because they didn't understand what they were facing. The Tiger moved again. Slow, precise, almost calm. It shifted position just enough to break their aim, just enough to stay one step ahead. Smoke wrapped around it, making it harder to track, harder to hit, harder to kill. Keep firing! Don't let him breathe! Another shell slammed into the turret. Ricochet. Another hit the side. Ricochet. Inside the Soviet tanks, the tension snapped into fear. Not loud panic, but something colder. The realization that they might not win this, that they might not survive this, and then another shot, another T-34 gone. Now the battlefield was no longer controlled. Tanks collided, trying to maneuver. Some reversed, others pushed forward blindly. Radio chatter turned into noise, overlapping voices shouting different orders, different directions. Left flank, move left. No, stay forward. We need support. But there was no support. Only him. The Tiger fired again. Another kill. The number of burning wrecks kept growing, black smoke rising into the sky, turning the battlefield into a graveyard of steel. Visibility dropped even further. Shapes blurred. Targets disappeared. And yet, he kept finding them. How was he seeing us? Because he wasn't reacting. He was predicting every movement they made. He was already aiming for it. Another T-34 tried to rush forward, accelerating, trying to close the distance, trying to force the fight into close range where they might have a chance. The Tiger turned, fired. The tank exploded before it even got close. We can't get near him! More shells struck the Tiger. More sparks, more noise. The entire machine was now covered in impact marks, dents, scars from dozens of hits. But it was still moving, still firing, still killing. We're losing too many. And that was the moment everything changed. The advance had completely collapsed. No more formation, no more plan, only survival. Some tanks began pulling back. Others hesitated. Some kept firing out of pure instinct. But the confidence was gone, replaced by something much stronger. Fear. Real fear. Fall back! Fall back! The order finally came through the chaos. But leaving wasn't easy, because turning your back meant exposing your weakest armor. And he knew it. The Tiger fired again. Another tank destroyed while retreating. Move, move. It looked like a miracle. But something didn't add up. The battlefield finally fell silent as the last echoes of gunfire faded into the dim and distance. Engines slowed, metal cooled, and what remained was not victory, but aftermath. Burned wrecks of T-34 tanks were scattered across the field in every direction, some still smoldering, others completely destroyed. Twisted steel marking where moments ago men were alive, moving, fighting, believing they would win. The ground itself looked torn apart, scarred by explosions, tracks, and impact craters, and in the middle of all that destruction, one shape still stood out, still operational, still intact, still there. The Tiger. Covered in marks, dozens of impacts across its armor, dents, scratches, scars from shells that hit but failed to penetrate. It looked less like a machine and more like something that had survived something impossible. Inside it, there was no celebration, no cheering, just heavy breathing, tension slowly leaving the crew as reality settled in, because even they understood. What just happened should not have been possible. One tank facing so many, and yet the advance had stopped. The Soviets had pulled back, not in strategy, not in control, but because they had no other option left. And that's the moment where the story begins to take shape, the kind of story that spreads fast, the kind that people want to believe, the kind that turns into legend. A single Tiger tank holding off an entire force, destroying tank after tank, standing against overwhelming odds and winning. It sounds perfect. Too perfect. Because when the smoke cleared and the battlefield could finally be examined, the details didn't fully match the legend that would later be told. Yes, there were destroyed tanks, many of them, but not all of them were in positions that confirmed they were hit by the Tiger. Some were further back, some closer to the original line, some in places where the angle didn't make sense for a single shooter. And then there were other factors. Artillery had been active. Anti-tank weapons were in play. Air support had been reported in the area. The battlefield was not a controlled environment, it was chaos, and chaos does not create clean, simple stories. But history often does. Reports began to form, numbers were assigned, and soon the claim emerged. Over 20 tanks destroyed by a single Tiger tank under one commander. A hero was created, a symbol of power, precision, superiority. A story that could be told, repeated, remembered. But on the other side, the experience felt very different. Soviet crews who survived described confusion more than defeat, lack of coordination, unclear orders, units moving forward without proper support, no maps, no full understanding of the terrain or enemy positions. They weren't facing a single clear target. They were moving through smoke, under fire from multiple directions, trying to react to something they couldn't fully see or understand. Some tanks were hit before even reaching the main line. Others were caught in crossfire. Some never had a chance to engage properly. And in that kind of environment, it becomes almost impossible to determine who destroyed what. But that doesn't stop a story from forming. Because a simple story is always stronger than a complex truth. One tank against many. One commander against overwhelming odds. One moment that defines everything. It's clean, it's powerful, it's easy to remember. But war is never like that. War is confusion, overlapping действия, miscommunication, fear, noise, mistakes happening in seconds that change everything. The Tiger was powerful, that is undeniable. Its armor could withstand hits that others couldn't. Its gun could destroy targets at distances where others struggled. It had the advantage, especially in that moment, especially in that terrain. But was it truly alone in what it achieved? Or was it just the most visible part of a much larger, much more chaotic battle where many factors played a role? Because while one name was remembered, many others were not. The infantry who held positions, the artillery units firing from a distance, the support that created the conditions for that moment to even happen. All of that fades when a legend takes over, and that's where the line between history and story begins to blur. The Tiger remained standing, yes. It survived multiple hits, continued fighting, and played a critical role in stopping the advance. That much is real, but the scale, the numbers, the idea of one machine alone defeating an entire force, that is where doubt begins. And maybe that's what makes this story so powerful. Not just what happened, but how it was remembered. Because in the end, we are not just looking at a battle. We are looking at how battles become legends, how chaos becomes narrative, how reality becomes something sharper, cleaner, more dramatic than it actually was. So what really happened that day? Was it a lone predator dominating the battlefield, unstoppable, unmatched, almost invincible? Or was it a moment of confusion, advantage, and timing, later shaped into something much bigger than the truth? There may never be a single clear answer, but one thing is certain: the battlefield tells one story, and history sometimes tells another. And somewhere between those two is where the truth really lies.